Your gas station just raised prices 60 cents overnight. Same underground tanks, same fuel that was cheaper yesterday, and it feels like somebody's ripping you off. But the mechanics behind that price jump aren't what most people think. Today, you'll understand why stations don't sell old, cheap inventory at last week's price, how replacement cost economics work, and why oil being a global commodity means your pump tracks wars halfway around the world, even when America produces more oil than it imports. I'm just telling you how it is, not my rules, and I'm not justifying or trying to defend or rationalize. I'm Mark Roach, 30 years in upstream oil and gas. The systems that price energy are designed by people with specific interest. And you deserve to understand how they actually work. Let's start with what happened. The Strait of Hormuz, a waterway 21 miles wide at its narrowest point between Iran and Oman, moves roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day under normal circumstances, normal conditions. That's about 20% of global petroleum consumption. On March 2nd, after escalating conflict between Iran and Western forces, that flow effectively stopped. Insurance companies withdrew war risk coverage. Commercial vessels won't cross without insurance. Shipping halted. Oil prices spiked immediately. West Texas Intermediate crude, the U.S. benchmark, jumped from the upper 60s in late February to the mid-90s by early March. That's a 30 to 40% move in less than a month. Brent crude, the global benchmark, climbed toward $100 per barrel or over. And gasoline prices at your local station moved with them, even though the fuel in those underground tanks was refined weeks ago from crude that cost $65 a barrel. Here's the first thing that most people get wrong. They assume U.S. gas prices track U.S. oil. Well, they don't, especially in times of crisis and war. U.S. gasoline prices move with Brent crude, the global benchmark, not West Texas Intermediate. So the Energy Information Administration has been clear on this for years. Even when WTI traded cheaper than Brent during past periods, U.S. gasoline prices didn't fall proportionally. Refiners and wholesale distributors price off global benchmarks because refined products trade globally. The U.S. is a net petroleum exporter overall. We produce over 13 million barrels per day of crude, last year, and we exported about over 4 million barrels a day. We import about 7 to 8% of our crude from the Persian Gulf. That's roughly 2% of total U.S. consumption. So why does the Middle East war spike your pump prices? Because oil is globally traded and the U.S. participates in that market. It's not sealed off. The U.S. is not isolated or insulated from world events. Headlines sometimes make us feel as if we are insulated. Think of it this way. We grow a lot of wheat in America. If the world's biggest grain export gets attacked, bread prices go up everywhere in the world, including here. Same mechanics. Oil works as a global commodity. When 20 million barrels per day of supply risk comes off the market, the entire global supply curve shifts. Brent crude jumps on expected scarcity and risk premium. U.S. refiners compete globally for crude. If Brent rises $10 to $15 per barrel on Hormuz fears, the cost passes through the U.S. wholesale gasoline and retail prices regardless of how much oil we produce domestically. Higher U.S. production provides volume flexibility. It cushions physical shortfalls. But it doesn't override global price discovery when a major choke point threatens 20% of world oil flows. U.S. shale can't ramp to 5 to 10 million barrels per day in weeks to replace a sudden Middle East outage. New supply takes 6 to 24 months to bring online. So prices react in days. Drill, baby, drill doesn't insulate you from global price spikes. It just means more barrels flow into the same global market if they're drilled. Now let's talk about why your gas station raised prices on a fuel that's already in the ground around the pump. You see, in the same tanks, the same physical product that was $3.20 a gallon last week, well, the sign jumped to $3.80 overnight. It feels predatory. But here's what's actually happening. Stations and wholesalers don't price off what they paid for inventory. They price off what it will cost to replace the inventory. The retailer with 10,000 gallons underground knows the next tanker delivery will cost more. Brent crude supply spikes, so they raise today's prices at the pump to ensure they can afford the next load and avoid selling cheap now, only to refill at a loss. That's the rationale. This is a standard replacement cost accounting practice, and it's how commodity markets work across industries. U.S. gasoline prices are driven by current spot crude and product prices, not embedded inventory cost. The Energy Information Administration is explicit on this. Prices move with Brent crude futures, which reflect forward-looking supply and demand expectations, including wars, embargoes, and choke point risk. When refiners and wholesalers buy crude or gasoline, they compete with others who are watching futures curves and geopolitical risk as well. The spot price bakes in those expectations immediately. If one station kept selling at last week's low price while replacement costs jumped, it would be drained by first by consumers who know it's underpriced. The only fuel left would be at a higher priced stations. Arbitrage forces prices up immediately across all sellers to the new expected cost. Here's the timing difference. Under normal conditions, not war conditions, but under normal conditions, crude price changes, well, they take days to weeks to fully show up at the retail pump. They work through the refinery runs, wholesale rack prices and delivery cycles. Retail prices also respond faster to crude increases than decreases. That's asymmetrical, pass through, and it takes several weeks for full transmission in either direction. But during a crisis, when war shuts a choke point that moves 20% of global oil, futures and spot benchmarks jump within hours. Wholesalers and retailers unpack or update rack and pump prices much faster because replacement cost risk is extreme and highly visible. Physical lags still exist, but the pricing layer compresses timing. Stations don't wait weeks to see if the shock is real when the world's key oil artery just shut. This is why it looks like price gouging. You anchor on what's physical in the ground, what you paid last week, not on futures curves and replacement costs. Most people see the same station, same tank, same product, and a sign that jumped 40 to 80 cents overnight. It feels exploitive. State laws typically define price gouging as raising prices excessively during a declared emergency compared with pre-emergency levels, often with thresholds around 10 to 25%, unless the seller's costs have similarly risen. If the increase is directly attributable to increased costs like crude, wholesale rack prices, transport, or insurance, it's generally not illegal gouging. When Brent and gasoline futures spike on a Hormuz shutdown, wholesale rack prices go up quickly. Stations move their signs to stay solvent, not to exploit. Most gas stations compete on pennies with a very slim per gallon margin, around 10 to 20%. They move prices because the underlying market moved, not because they're suddenly making a windfall profit. Where real gouging can occur is if a retailer uses the crisis as a cover to raise prices far beyond what higher wholesale costs plus normal margin would justify. For example, adding 50 to 80 cents extra of pure margin while competitors have not. That's what state attorney generals sometimes prosecute. But in competitive markets, that behavior gets corrected quickly because customers go elsewhere. Now let's talk about what firms are legally required to do. People often say corporations must maximize profit, and that's why prices spike. Well, that's not totally right. Corporate fiduciary duty does not impose a hard legal requirement to maximize short-term profit or charge the absolute maximum price on every transaction. Directors and officers owe duties of care and loyalty to the corporation and shareholders, but courts avoid second-guessing business judgments under the business judgment rule. What maximizes long-term value can include pricing gently to build brand, honoring contracts during spikes, or investing in customer relationships. In competitive markets, firms are often price takers or face strong rivals. They can't unilaterally charge maximum willingness to pay. Firms sometimes price below cost temporarily for penetration pricing, inventory clearance, or gaining market share, which can be rational if they expect to recoup later. Management can rationally choose less profit today for more tomorrow, like honoring term contracts at lower prices during spikes to preserve reputation or future business. No real-world firm is constantly at a provable global profit maximum. They balance price, volume, risk, contracts, and regulation to pursue long-term value under competitive restraints. This inevitably means pricing below the theoretical maximum on many sales. The bottom line, replacement cost pricing isn't gouging, it's how commodity markets function. Your station isn't profiteering, it's protecting its ability to refill their tanks. So the next best big question is, how long is this going to last? How long can it last? Well, the research on Hormuz disruptions show that the most major oil importers can survive up to 3 months on strategic reserves alone. Japan holds 254 days of import cover. South Korea has 200 to 208 days. China holds about 130 days of import cover with 900 million barrels in strategic and commercial storage. India is the most vulnerable with only 40 to 45 days of Hormuz-specific disruption buffer. But reserves are a stopgap, not a solution. Between 3 and 6 months is the critical inflection point. Reserves deplete. Alternative sources can't fully compensate. Demand destruction and rationing begin. Beyond 6 months would require coordinated International Energy Agency releases, massive non-Gulf production increases, and significant demand curtailment. Can alternative sources replace Hormuz flows? Only partially. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline to Yanbu on the Red Sea has about 5 million barrels per day nameplate capacity, but only 1.9 million barrels per day was utilized pre-crisis, giving roughly 3 million barrels per day incremental capacity. Yanbu port loading is the bottleneck. The UAE's Habshan Fujairah pipeline has a 1.5 to 1.8 million barrel per day capacity, already exporting over 1 million barrels per day, so limited spare capacity remains. Combined bypass capacity is about 4 to 5 million barrels per day maximum against 20 million barrels per day normal Hormuz flows. That's only 20 to 25% coverage. OPEC Plus spare capacity is estimated at 3.5 to 5.6 million barrels per day globally, but most of that is trapped behind the Strait in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq. Non-Gulf producers like the US, Brazil, Canada, and West Africa can redirect cargoes to Asia, but that requires weeks of transit via the Cape of Good Hope, adding about 12 days per voyage and significant cost. Global inventories theoretically total 8.2 billion barrels, enough to cover 400 days mathematically. But those barrels are dispersed and can't all be redirected to Asia quickly. A prolonged closure beyond 2 to 3 months would push oil prices toward or well above $100 per barrel and required demand rationing in vulnerable economics. For you, the impact is straightforward. Every $10 increase in crude adds roughly 24 cents per gallon of gasoline prices. WTI gained about $30 per barrel from its lows in the early February to mid-90s in early March. That's 70 cents per gallon at the pump if the move holds. National average gasoline prices were climbing toward $4 per gallon as of early March. If WTI pushes to $100 or more, like it's looking like, you're probably looking at $4.50 or higher. Diesel follows the same math. Every dollar added to diesel ripples through the trucking costs, food prices, heating oil. This isn't abstract. This is your commute, your grocery bill, your heating cost. The Strait of Hormuz will reopen eventually. Diplomacy, military pressure, economic necessity will force it. 20 million barrels per day of oil doesn't stay offline indefinitely without triggering global recessions. When it does reopen, prices will fall. How fast and how far depend on how much infrastructure damage occurred, how much supply was permanently lost, and how much demand destruction happened during the disruption. But while it's closed, prices stay high, and every week it stays closed, the damage compounds. Refineries shut down, chemical plants pause operations, airlines cut routes, consumers drive less, businesses defer spending, and the longer it lasts, the deeper the economic impact. Your decisions right now should reflect that reality. If you can defer driving, defer it. If you can consolidate trips, do it. If your budget is tight, understand that grocery prices will follow fuel prices over the next 4 to 6 weeks as trucking costs pass through. This isn't about politics, it's about whether you support it's not about whether you support one energy policy or another. It's just understanding the actual mechanics so you can make better decisions for yourself and your household. Strait of Hormuz is a geographic choke point that one country can close with drones and missiles. The concentration risk is staggering, and it's built into the global energy system, unfortunately by design now, by default, maybe not by accident. The people who structured these supply chains, they knew the risk. They accepted them because the profits were enormous and the alternatives were expensive. You're the one paying for that decision now. I'm Mark Roach with FutureWise Energy. Oil is a global commodity, and the replacement cost pricing means today's pump prices reflect tomorrow's refill cost, not yesterday's inventory.